Imagine for a second that you are walking through this beautiful, sprawling house,
Right.
and the owner is giving you the grand tour. He's showing you the freshly painted living room, the expensive art on the walls, the view from the balcony.
Sounds pretty nice.
Right. And he's telling you everything is totally under control, the foundation is solid, the future is bright. But then, standing quietly in the corner of the room, there's an architect holding a set of blueprints.
Oh, that's never a good sign.
No, it really isn't. And he's pointing at the floorboards, just sort of whispering, actually, the foundation is cracking, the plumbing is leaking, and you don't even own that art on the wall.
Yeah, that is a very uncomfortable dinner party.
It really is. But that is essentially the exact political situation we're looking at today for this deep dive.
Yeah, we are heading to the Horn of Africa today.
Specifically to Djibouti. And we have a fascinating clash of narratives on our desk that perfectly illustrates this tension between the tour guide and the architect.
It really is a battle of perspective. On one side, we have the long-standing president of Djibouti, Ismail Omar Guelleh. He recently gave this high-profile interview to the media outlet Jeune Afrique.
Right.
And he's presenting the freshly painted house version of the country, stable, controlled, unified. He is the owner giving the tour.
And then standing in the corner with the blueprints is Alexis Mohammed.
Exactly.
He's a prominent opposition leader in Djibouti, and he just published a scorching op-ed. It's titled, "Power Confronted by Its Contradictions."
And I think we need to be clear for everyone listening. This isn't just a random social media rant or a quick blog post.
No, not at all.
This is a primary source document. It's a systematic, point-by-point dismantling of the president's interview. Mohammed isn't just saying, I disagree. He's arguing that the president is living in a completely different reality from his citizens.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. The mission here is to look at these specific contradictions.
And just to remind you as we get into this, we're not taking sides here.
Definitely not.
Our goal is impartially analyzing these two competing narratives about the state of a nation, covering everything from the rules of democracy and national identity to foreign policy and the actual economy.
We're just looking at how two powerful figures can look at the exact same nation and see two completely different things. And honestly, the language here is striking. You read the text and Muhammad isn't using, polite diplomatic euphemisms.
No, he really isn't holding back.
I circled a few phrases right away. He uses terms like absurd and unvarnished disregard, blatant contradiction. It feels like the gloves are off.
Yeah, it's not the kind of language you usually see in formal political rebuttals.
It really isn't.
But beyond the tone, what we're really looking at is the substance. Muhammad identifies this massive gap between the macro indicators, the stuff governments love to brag about, and the daily realities on the ground.
So let's start where the power lies, the political game itself. In his interview, President Guelleh makes a really specific claim. He says he doesn't manufacture opponents.
Which is such a fascinating choice of words, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't manufacture opponents. By saying that, he's essentially shrugging his shoulders to the international community. He's telling them, look, I'm in charge because there's simply nobody else.
Right.
He implies the opposition is weak by nature, and it's not his fault if no one steps up to the plate.
It's a very clever way of framing his dominance as a meritocracy. He's basically saying, I'm winning because I'm the best runner, not
I'm winning because I own the stadium.
exactly. It shifts the burden of proof entirely. If there are no opponents, he argues it must be because there are no worthy candidates. But Muhammad jumps on this immediately in the op-ed.
He really does. He attacks the framework of that competition.
Yeah.
His counterargument is that you can't blame the lack of runners if you've bolted the doors to the track.
He uses a specific example here that I found honestly pretty shocking when I read it.
The security guarantees.
Yes. He mentions an opposition figure. He doesn't name him, but the context implies a serious contender who wants to run for office. But this person has to request security guarantees just to enter the country to submit his candidacy paperwork.
Let's just pause on that for a second because the implication is huge.
It's massive.
In a functioning democracy, filing for candidacy means, filling out forms, maybe paying a fee, collecting some signatures. Here, Muhammad is saying it involves negotiating for your physical safety.
Right. You have to ask the guy in charge, hey, will I be arrested or hurt if I come home to run against you? That sort of answers the question of why there are no opponents, doesn't it?
It completely undermines the president's claim that the opposition is naturally weak. Muhammad calls this a locked political space.
Locked.
Right. He argues that for the president to claim he doesn't manufacture opponents while simultaneously presiding over a system where you literally need a security detail just to apply for the job, well, he calls it absurd.
It reminds me of those managed democracies where the outcome is decided before the vote is even cast. The president is acting like the lack of opposition is a bug in the system, but Mohammed is pointing out, no, this is a feature. You built it this way.
And that distinction is crucial for the listener to understand.
Hmm.
Mohammed is shifting the blame from the potential candidates to the system itself.
Yeah.
He's saying the talent is there, the desire is there, but the mechanism to express it is broken. If the framework is designed to exclude competition, then the lack of opponents is artificial. It's manufactured by the system.
So that's the political machinery, but the op-ed goes a lot deeper than that. It moves from how the government works to what the country actually is. There's this big debate about Djiboutianness.
Yes, national identity. This is a very common tool for long-serving leaders anywhere in the world.
Oh, absolutely.
President Gele, in his interview, seemingly tries to merge his own political survival with the survival of the nation itself. He presents himself as the guardian of Djiboutianness.
I am the state, effectively.
Or at least, without me, the state unravels. It's a way of legitimizing power by tying it to patriotism. If you oppose the leader, you aren't just an opposition party. You're anti-Djibouti. You're against the identity of the nation itself.
Which is a really dangerous narrative because it paints any form of disagreement as treason. And Mohammed pushes back hard on this. He lists out several things that he claims are fundamentally incompatible with true national identity.
It's a real laundry list of grievances. Mohammed argues you cannot claim to be the guardian of national identity while you are simultaneously centralizing all decision-making, weakening institutions, and this is the big one, curtailing public debate.
So his core argument is that Djiboutianness isn't about one guy at the top holding the whole thing together.
Right. He writes, and I think this is really the philosophical core of his entire argument, national identity is safeguarded through open institutions, not through rhetoric.
Wow. That's a very strong distinction. Identity is preserved by institutions, not speeches.
Think about what that actually means in practice. He's saying that a strong nation is one that can handle disagreement. A strong nation has checks and balances.
Yeah.
By silencing debate, the president isn't protecting the nation. He's making it brittle. If the only thing holding the country together is one man's control, that's not a national identity. That's a personality cult.
Because if everyone is just afraid to speak, that's not unity. That's just fear masquerading as unity.
Precisely.
Yep.
Mohammed suggests that by undermining the country's history and preventing a shared narrative from forming organically through debate, through art, through real politics, the leadership is actually dissolving the bonds that hold the country together. You just can't force identity from the top down.
Let's zoom out a bit,
Yeah.
because Djibouti isn't just any country. It is in one of the most strategic spots on the planet.
Oh, without a doubt.
The Horn of Africa, right there overlooking the Red Sea. Everyone has a military base there. The U.S., China, France, Japan. It is a very crowded neighborhood.
It is incredibly high-stakes real estate. And this brings us to the foreign policy section of the op-ed. In the Jeu d'Afrique interview, President Gele apparently downplayed some pretty significant tensions with key allies.
Specifically, the U.S., Israel, and the UAE. Right?
Yes. His tone in the interview was very much, we have some disagreements, but we are sovereign, we handle it.
Which sounds strong on paper. We don't bow to anyone. It's exactly the kind of thing that probably gets huge applause at a political rally.
Sure, it plays incredibly well domestically.
Yeah.
But Mohammed argues this is actually incredibly reckless. He points out that these aren't just casual acquaintances.
Yeah.
Djibouti relies heavily on these relationships for security cooperation and, crucially, direct investment.
Right. If the rent checks stop coming for those military bases or the port investments dry up, Djibouti has a massive problem. It's not like they have a huge manufacturing base to fall back on.
And that is exactly Mohammed's critique. He says it's not about whether you have disagreements. Countries always disagree with each other. It's about whether the leadership is measuring the impact of those public statements.
He's looking at the fallout.
Yes. He accuses the president of prioritizing a tough soundbite over the country's actual economic and security foundation.
It's that mirror analogy again. The president looks in the mirror and sees independent leaders standing tall. The opposition holds up the mirror and sees risk-taker gambling with the national checkbook.
And speaking of gambling with security, there is a fascinating segment in this text on migration. This is a huge issue in the Horn of Africa, with instability in neighboring countries pushing a lot of people across borders.
The president's narrative here is one of total control, right? We are the masters of our borders.
Yes, perfectly fitting that theme of stability we talked about at the start.
Yeah.
He wants to project the image that Djibouti is this island of order in a chaotic region. But Mohammed points out a glaring data gap that completely undercuts that claim.
What's the gap?
He notes that the state doesn't even possess reliable statistics on the number of undocumented migrants currently within the territory.
Wait, so the government is claiming full control of the situation, but they can't even tell you how many people are actually there.
That is the exact contradiction he's highlighting. How can you manage a complex issue like regional migration if you don't even have the baseline numbers? Mohammed calls this using dismissive formulas.
Dismissive formulas.
Basically using tough talk to cover up a sheer lack of administrative competence.
And that's really dangerous because migration isn't just a paperwork issue. It creates real, tangible social pressure.
Exactly. Mohammed alludes to rising social tensions and regional pressures. If you ignore the reality on the ground just because you want to maintain an image of total control, you risk letting those tensions boil over.
Yeah.
He's calling for structured, transparent management based on facts rather than just dismissive rhetoric. You can't solve a problem you refuse to even measure.
Facts really seem to be the recurring theme here, which leads us perfectly to the part that probably matters most to the average family in Djibouti, and that's the economy.
The bread and butter issues.
Mm-hmm.
Or, as Mohammed frames it, the visible gap between the macro and the micro.
We see this everywhere, don't we? A government releases a shiny report saying GDP is up 4%. But the regular person at the grocery store is paying double for milk. It's the disconnect between the spreadsheet and the street.
It is a universal political friction point. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
But Mohammed argues it is particularly acute in Djibouti. The government relies heavily on these macroeconomic indicators, big infrastructure projects, port revenues, GDP growth.
Things that look great in a PowerPoint presentation to the World Bank or the IMF.
Exactly. But they don't necessarily trickle down to the citizens.
Well, the phrase trickle down kind of creates the image that it eventually gets there.
Fair point.
Mohammed is arguing there is a visible gap, a total disconnect. He lists exactly what GDP per capita doesn't tell you.
And it's a very revealing list. Because I think a lot of people hear GDP and just automatically assume it means wealth for everyone.
So break down the list for us. What is the GDP hiding?
Well, Mohammed points out that GDP doesn't capture wealth disparities. So if a few people at the very top get incredibly rich, the mathematical average goes up, even if everyone else is actually getting poorer.
Right. The average hides the extremes.
Second, it doesn't reflect real purchasing power, meaning what your money actually buys in the local market. And crucially, it completely ignores genuine access to sustainable employment.
He uses that phrase again here, unvarnished disregard. He's accusing the administration of basically ignoring the heavy realities of high debt and rising poverty, just sweeping it under the rug of macro indicators.
And he specifically highlights the youth in this section. He talks about a youth population that is simply waiting for opportunities.
That phrase, waiting for opportunities, really struck me when I read it. It paints a vivid picture of a whole generation stuck in limbo.
In development economics, they actually sometimes call this waithood. Yeah. You're an adult, you're educated, but you literally can't start your adult life. You can't buy a home, you can't get married, you can't build a future, all because the economy has no spot for you.
Oh.
You are just waiting. Mohammed is saying that waving a positive GDP report at a young person in that exact situation isn't just tone deaf, it's insulting.
It really connects back to the manufacturing opponents point we discussed earlier. If you have an entire generation of young people with no jobs and no hope, you don't need to manufacture opposition.
No, you don't.
The economy is manufacturing it for you every single day.
That is a very astute connection. The economic failure feeds the political instability, which then leads to the crackdown, which leads right back to that locked political space. It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And Mohammed argues that focusing only on the macro numbers allows the president to completely ignore this cycle.
So we've looked at the political lockdown, we've looked at the battle over national identity, the really risky foreign policy, and this massive economic disconnect. Mohammed has laid out a pretty comprehensive indictment here, but where does he actually land? What is the final ultimatum?
The conclusion is really where he tries to completely shatter the president's curated image. He synthesizes all these separate points into a very specific critique of the president's behavior.
Okay.
He says the president is acting like a commentator.
A commentator, like us.
Essentially, yes. Mohammed argues that throughout the Jeune Afrique interview, the president talks about unemployment, about migration, about diplomatic tensions, as if he were just an outside observer,
Interesting.
as if he were just analyzing the country's problems from the
Huh.
sidelines.
Like he's saying, wow, look at how bad unemployment is. Someone should really do something about that.
Exactly. But he is the someone. He's the head of state. He's been in absolute power for over 2 decades. Mohammed's final verdict is a flat-out demand for accountability. I'll give you the key quote. He writes, "The president must simply answer for his repeated failures on all fronts and assume responsibility for them, rather than merely commenting on them." That is a mic drop moment. Stop telling us what the problems are. You are the one in charge of fixing them. It strikes right at the heart of the strongman paradox. The president claims total control to justify his continued power. He essentially says, I am the only one who can run this country. Yeah. But when things go wrong, he adopts the pose of a detached observer. Mohammed is saying, you can't have it both ways. If you have the authority, you own the failures.
It brings us right back to that mirror analogy we started with. The president looks in the mirror and sees a wise, stable leader guiding the ship. Mohammed holds up the mirror and says, no, look closer. You're the captain, but the ship is taking on water, and you're just standing there describing the leak.
And if the captain doesn't grab a bucket, the description really doesn't matter. The whole criticism implies that the president has become so insulated, so totally removed from the daily realities of his people, that he can discuss their genuine suffering as if it were just an academic concept.
So to wrap this up for you, the listener, why does this specific op-ed from Djibouti matter?
I think it matters because while the specific details are Djiboutian, the dynamic we're talking about is universal. We see this everywhere in the world.
We really do.
It's the constant tension between the curated image, the polished PR version of a country that leaders want to project, and the actual lived experience of the citizen on the street.
It's a masterclass in media literacy, really. When you hear a leader citing big macro statistics or giving grand speeches about unity, you have to stop and ask, is this the reality or is this just the freshly painted living room?
We always have to look for the architect with the blueprint. We have to look at the real framework of competition, the actual health of the institutions, and the reality of the grocery bill. We have to peer back the rhetoric to see if the foundation is actually sound.
And we have to ask that final, truly provocative question that Mohammed implies with his whole piece. In a political system where a single leader claims absolute power and total control, at what point does commenting on problems actually become a confession?
A confession that the control is just an illusion.
Exactly.
If you have all the power, but can only talk about the problems as if they're happening to someone else, do you really have the power at all? Or are you just holding the steering wheel while the car drives itself off a cliff?
Something for you to chew on next time you watch the news, whether it's about the Horn of Africa or anywhere else. That is it for today's deep dive into the rhetoric and reality of Djibouti. Thanks for listening.
Stay curious.